Hi everyone, how are you doing today? So this is the editorial analysis of the newspapers for today, that is January 2017, which will be presented to you by me, Dipanshu Singh. You can, if you wish to read more about me and contact me, you can go through this link and follow me on Academy to get updates on my courses. And if you have any personal queries or doubts, or if you want to ask any particular question regarding exam or preparation, you can reach out to me through an Academy's Discuss page. You can click on my profile and message me, or also post your questions in the discussion thread. So this is the agenda for today. We'll be covering these articles, and this is the answer writing practice question for today, that despite being one of the most peaceful borders in Asia, the Indo-Nepal border is not free of the critical problems. So critically analyze this statement while suggesting the way forward, and use an Academy Discuss site where I'll be creating a thread for today's answer writing practice after uploading this video. So the first article is a very important, very informative, and very interesting article about energy generation from waste and how solid waste management should be undertaken in cities in India. So management of solid waste or garbage must have three elements. The first is that the element is segregation of the biodegradable or wet waste from dry waste source. So these are the guidelines on how to segregate waste. So you can go through this, you can pause the slide and you can look at it. So dry waste will go separately, the sanitary waste should go in a separate bin, the wet waste and the hazardous and the garden waste should be thrown out separately. And the second is that once segregation is achieved, municipal governments can use this wet waste to produce compost and biogas in biomethanation plant, which can be used for energy generation or for cooking and fuel purposes. And third is that when the dry waste, after removing the recyclable elements, should go to the waste to energy plants. So this specific article talks about these kind of dry waste which will be used for waste to energy plants, and this will reduce the volume of waste that remains to be sent to landfills. Since India is already a very land deprived country, we have a very second highest population in the world, we already have a very shortfall of land, so using the method of landfill is not feasible for us. So what we look at about the waste to energy plants. So waste to energy plants use incineration, refuse derived fuel based combustion or conversion technologies such as pyrolysis and gasification. So pyrolysis is breaking down of a substance under high heat, and gasification is basically burning of these waste materials under the controlled oxygen level to produce energy, produce basically syngas, which is a combination of certain gases. We'll look about that. We'll look about syngas in the coming slides. So, but the issue is that there is a great deal of confusion about what to do about the different technologies, and there is also an apprehension about the potentially damaging impact of waste to energy plants on the environment in general, that is about the air quality and consequently on public health after the financial viability as well. So this is also in question. So as you know that there's already a very big issue of environmental pollution, air pollution in Delhi regarding these Ghaziapur plant and the other waste to energy generation plants. So if you look at two examples from Delhi. So first is about the incineration plant of at the Okhla in South Delhi. So it processes almost 2,000 tons of the solid waste every day to feed its boiler and produce 16 megawatt of electricity. But earlier it did not used to comply with emission requirements, and finally NGT gave it clearance after it complied with the orders and guidelines of the Central Pollution Control Board. Next is the waste to energy plant at Ghazipur, East Delhi, which is based on controlled combustion, that is the gasification. So it produces the refused derived fuel from segregated dry waste and uses the same inside boilers to generate electricity, performing at the EU standards of emission. So this plant receives 1,300 tons of mixed waste every year, which has been reduced to about 40% of the total after segregation. And from 550 tons of feedstock, the plant produces approximately 12 megawatt of electricity, which is good. But then obviously it has to also comply with the environmental regulation and the combustion and the air standards. So incineration based waste to energy plants, so they basically rely on mass burning. So this is an example of an incineration based plant. So the solid waste is basically thrown in, all together into the fire place, and then the gas generated may contain dioxin and furans, which are toxic and can be lethal. And this is the syngas outlet if you look at the diagram, and therefore these plants need to be put in place emission control filters of a very high standard to check the release of harmful gases in the atmosphere. And there's also a need for continuous monitoring of emission and sharing of information openly. So this can be good, but then these are not that viable actually the waste gasification plant have several advantages over incineration. We'll look at them because they necessarily extensive flue gas cleaning may be performed on the syngas instead of the much larger volume of the flue gas after combustion, and the power generated is directly to the engines and turbines, which are much more cheaper and efficient than from the incineration plants, and they also produce other synthetic fuels instead of electricity and can also be used, and they also have treatment for ash which contain heavy metal. So the waste gasification plants basically have several advantage over the incineration plants. So here the garbage is generally dumped, and the whole the garbage once burns off, the gases, the syngas which is produced is collected and which can be used for several other purposes, but obviously they have the issue of releasing of toxic gases. So that is why the incineration plants is not preferred. So this is the general diagram of waste to energy generation. So waste is collected and then sent to plant, and the waste process basically converts this into energy which can be used for fuel, gas and electricity. So global examples, we look at them. So Singapore based used incineration plants with due environmental precaution. Then Japan and a number of European countries also rely on incineration with due precaution. And US has a long free run of incineration plants. They basically used to rely on landfills because they had a lot of land available, but abundance of land available. But that is not the case with India. And we therefore urgently need innovation in this field. The innovation in waste to energy technologies worldwide has been focusing on the pyrolysis, the gasification and the plasma gasification. So because these can deliver a cleaner emission but are also very expensive, and these technologies involve heating of solid waste gas at very high temperature in an oxygen controlled environment. That is what I told you is the gasification process to produce syngas, which is basically a fuel gas mixture of primarily hydrogen, carbon monoxide and very often some carbon dioxide. So this can be a potential question on what are the components of syngas. It has the advantage that it can be burned directly or transported through pipelines and or tankers for use in electricity generation, refining, chemical and fertilizer industries. Also, while syngas can be scrubbed and converted into clean energy source, the technologies are expensive, compromising the commercial viability of plants based on conversion technologies. Therefore, we need innovations to make the process a little more cheaper. The other article is about the don't let the messenger shoot themselves. So this is about the dismal condition of our security personnel working in the army and the security forces. So little attention has been paid to the serious concerns about the systems of military justice. So there was a report by Rajya Sabha in the Rajya Sabha and the Parliament Standing Committee about the rising number of suicides in the armed forces, and delays in the judicial system are notorious. The delays from the armed forces can actually turn fatal in the form of suicide and the fratricide also fragging, where a serviceman kills his brother in arms. There have been numerous incidents regarding this which has been reported in news. So basically, an army marches on its stomach is a famous quote by Napoleon Bonaparte. So basically, this explains the whole concept of this article, that we need to provide adequate facilities to our military personnel if we are to be a more stable and a secure nation in terms of security aspects. So this is in line with the BSF Constable Tej Bahadur's other video, which was released about tasteless dal and half-burnt parathas. So there have been previous cases in 1984 about the signalman Ranjit Thakur, which refused food while serving for 28 days imprisonment for overriding the hierarchy. He made several representations, and a summary court-martial was conducted for his act of disobeying the order to eat. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 1 year rigorous imprisonment, dismissal from the army and disqualification from civilian service. But fortunately for him, the Supreme Court found his sentence to be grossly disproportionate and reinstated him with full pay and benefits. So there are certain existential questions. So BSF goes extend much further than merely bad food. They have a lot of other issues. The BSF bill specifically, there was disparity between the army and the BSF in terms of pay, service condition, grievance redress mechanisms, and the deployment to forward areas. Then rejecting these concerns and refusing to refer to the bill to the Parliamentary Standing Committee and the Select Committee, the bill was basically passed and was an independent India's first parliamentary force was born without much discussion and deliberation in Parliament. And today, no less than 7 paramilitary forces exist, each created with less parliamentary debate than the previous one. And these forces are all under the Home Ministry, in contrast to the Army, Air Force and Navy and Coast Guard, which are under the Defense Ministry. So if you look at the Armed Forces Tribunal, it came into being in 2007, 25 years after the Supreme Court made a scathing remarks about the military justice system in the Lieutenant Colonel Pritipal Singh Bedi versus Union of India case of 1982 for not having not even one single layer of judicial scrutiny, for unchecked command, influence and decision making, or for absence for recording reasons in final judgments. Even the Law Commission report stated that the disciplinary and service matter requires provide quick resolutions, and proposed a special tribunal for the military and paramilitary forces. So the Armed Forces Tribunal Bill was steered through the Parliament only by the Defence Ministry, leaving paramilitary forces, even the Assam Rifles and the Coast Guard, outside the tribunal's purview. So that is why Armed Forces Tribunal is separate, does not deal with the cases of the security forces which are under the Home Ministry. And the other issue is that the paramilitary forces continue to follow a court-martial-like system similar to the security forces court, but they have very less legal safeguards, and even if they have, they are found grossly inadequate by the Supreme Court, because the penalties can also include the death sentence which can be imposed on them. And there's also no process of appeal other than to the Home Minister, and the only recourse left is expensive and time-consuming writ petition. So even this is being kind of compromised due to the fundamental rights under Article 33 of the Constitution, which makes approaching civil and judicial system a challenge. They have certain restrictions for the armed forces personnel under the Article 33. The system under the army, though, is also not foolproof. There's a case of serviceman languishing in jail from past 25 years, with his case being tossed between army and several courts. And there's also a continued secrecy which is being maintained by the government on these issues. There was a report by ITSA which was not made public for the contention made by the government that it can actually affect the morale of the army and the security forces. And in this particular case, the Home Ministry is basically in damage control mode, so it would not do well for them. Basically, they need to come out and instead focus on taking steps to prevent these issues and provide adequate services to the servicemen. Now, other articles regarding permission to prosecute. So there are some conflicting views about Supreme Court's order on precondition of sanctions for the prosecution of public servant under Section 19 of the Prevention of Corruption Act of 1988. So there have been several judgments. Certain cases have preferred that there is no sanction required, and then the Supreme Court in the famous Subramaniam Swamy case has said that no prior sanction is required because it would otherwise be very unconstitutional if prior sanction is required for prosecution under the Prevention of Corruption Act. So the Section 19, the provision aims to balance two competing interests. One is the need to ensure an honest public servant is not hounded in the performance of his or her duties by frivolous complaints. The other is that the investigation into an allegation of crime isn't stifled at the threshold due to the power wielded by the public servant. So basically, this section imposes a bar on the court to take cognizance of an offence till a sanction is obtained by the government, and the bar is against the court to take cognizance for the purpose of trial. However, there is no prohibition either under the Prevention of Corruption Act or the Criminal Procedure Code to start an investigation while lodging an FIR through a court-initiated investigation. So there have been previous court orders, as I told you. The decision in the Ayappa and Naran Swamy basically take the view that investigation cannot be ordered under Section 156 without a prior sanction from the government or the competent authority. However, this was reversed in 2014 Subramaniam Swamy versus Union of India case, which held that the prior sanction required for investigation lead is unconstitutional, and it held that the investigation is central to the criminal system and cannot be subverted by imposing a restriction on the police and the threshold itself. And the court also held that if there is an accusation of bribery as such, the status of the offender is not relevant. So there can be certain implication with this, because there have been certain flip-flops regarding this judgment. Basically give a handle to the executive and the government to scuttle a potential investigation. So a high-ranked official can actually misuse these provisions, even defying not to register FIR against them. And the court in this case has actually left a loophole for influential public servants who can be accused of corruption to nip an investigation in the bud. So it is therefore imperative for the Supreme Court to render an authoritative pronouncement and correct the apparent anomalies in the state of law on sanction. So the other article is very interesting about the RBI's autonomy and independence. So basically, this article tells us that there are fewer areas where it is independent and where it is not independent. And the question of independence arose when the landmark order of demonetization came up. So for a few basic steps about the RBI. So basically, the decision is made by the RBI board, which is sent to the governor, and then governor gives it to officers. So what the law says about RBI is that the RBI Act of Section 7 of Management lays out things quite unambiguously. So part 1 of the section says that certain government from time to time may give such direction to the bank as it may after the consultation with the governor of the bank, and the part 2 and 3 specify other sections which clearly give the signal of a seniority principle taking precedence over the matters. Therefore, the central government's advice gives the advice to central board and then to the governor. There are certain differences between RBI, which basically government decides the policy and implementation is with the RBI. It is by the elected representatives, and this is by bureaucrats. And the government owns banks and regulates the bank. So other thing about this is that so where does the RBI and the government fight? It's related to the debt management. There was an issue of a debt management agency where there were conflicts. There is again an issue of managing of PSU banks because the government is the owner of PSU banks, and then there is an issue that the RBI is the regulator of these banks. So on setting of interest rate, basically the monetary policy committee was formed. So these are the issues. So conclusion that the RBI has certain independence and the government needs to give them autonomy. So this is it for today, guys. I hope you like the video. Thank you so much.